For thousands of years, the standard and primary relationship between human beings was marriage, one man and one woman for a lifetime. Today, pun intended, we have an entire rainbow of options that our culture believes are interchangeable, including one that you maybe haven't heard about called consensual non-monogamy. Let's talk about marriage. New census data that has been released recently shows some key takeaways in American culture related to divorce and marriage. A couple of examples. In 2021, for every 1,000 marriages, only 13.6 ended in divorce. That is continuing a downward trend of divorce since pre-pandemic days. Divorce is becoming less frequent in American culture. While that's good news, the reason for the decline in divorce is probably related to another statistic that shows a decline in marriage itself. For every 1,000 unmarried adults in 2021, only 30.5 got married. These trends tell us a couple of things. Divorce is decreasing as a common status in American culture, but it's probably decreasing because we are having fewer marriages take place. Fewer marriages equal fewer divorces. It also leads to another situation. It leads to fewer babies. What we see now is many experts were expecting that after the pandemic, marriages and births, which had seemingly been put on hold, would have a surge. There would be this sort of pent-up passion for people to get married again and start families. The statistics don't seem to bear that out. The fact is that the trends that were in place before the pandemic seem to have picked up right where they left off. Divorces go down, but marriages are going down, and the birth rate continues to go down. We have, as far as fertility rate, our fertility rate in America right now is 1.6 children per family. That is well below the 2.1 rate that is what we call the replacement rate. That is the number of babies that need to be born in order for us to stabilize our population. Now, there is some good news here. That is that of the marriages that are happening, statistics seem to show that marriage is more stable today than it has been in more than a generation. That's probably because the people who are actually getting married are being more selective, more careful about establishing those relationships. Here's the competition. We do know that traditional marriage is now seen as one of the options, which includes several other possibilities. One of which is the trend toward what we call same-sex or same-gender marriages. I don't view those as actual marriages. That's a topic for a different truth currents. Marriage is not a term that is culturally defined. Marriage preceded culture. Marriage was in place, instituted by God, really before human culture even began to take place. Marriage goes back to the Garden of Eden. God established that. So for us to even use the language of marriage is a little bit disingenuous. If our culture wants to acknowledge same-gender partnerships, if we've made a move in that direction, so be it. But I'm not going to refer to that as marriage. But I will talk about some other competing situations to marriage. The most common of which is generally referred to as living together. The technical term is cohabitation. It's interesting that just in recent months, Netflix, always a mirror reflection of the broader culture, Netflix has released a popular new reality show called The Ultimatum. This is a show featuring 6 couples who have been dating for roughly 2 years, dating each other for roughly 2 years. In each pair, one person is ready to get married, and the other person is hesitant about taking the leap. What this show promises is to provide couples with what it calls an accelerated experience to show them exactly what marriage is like. As though any reality show, particularly one put on by Netflix, can give an accurate and true representation of what marriage is like, they establish what they call a 3-week trial marriage. In those 3 weeks, they match up pairs from different couples. They put a man and a woman together that are not dating, from different couples. They allow them to cohabit or live together for 3 weeks. Apparently, for Netflix, living in the same house and sleeping in the same bed with a stranger is their definition of marriage. In this trial marriage, they then film the interactions and the events that take place. And there are countless on-screen anecdotes that help illustrate what decades of research have already concluded. That is, that living together before making a lifelong commitment to marriage just isn't helpful. Premarital cohabitation has preceded more than 70% of marriages in modern culture. However, research continues to show that living together before marriage correlates with less happy marriages and higher divorce rates. Women who lived with their spouse before marriage are 15% more likely to get divorced, while women who lived with more than one partner before finally marrying one of them find that they are more than twice as likely to get divorced. The reality is that cohabitation is not a trial run for marriage. It's a mindset that creates an evaluation and comparison approach to relationships. Rather than helping achieve clarity, this Netflix reality show shows that living with a stranger ends up creating conflict and insecurity. Oh, I didn't tell you about the rest of the show. They take members of separate couples and they live together for 3 weeks. They sleep together, they live together, they do life together, and then they return to their previous dating partners and live with them for 3 weeks so that they have a way to measure whether their relationship is strong enough to move toward marriage. What happens is they prove that no one enjoys being evaluated and compared to other potential spouses, especially while sharing a home. Some of the couples on this show seem to learn how to share their feelings better. They have more honesty. They listen more effectively to each other. That's been a little side result of these experiments. But the experience caused several couples to completely end their relationship before getting married. And overall, the show perpetuates our society's idea that marriage is essentially a focus on self. They're all looking for someone who makes me feel better, helps me achieve my potential. They're looking for people who check all the boxes. And they spend much of their time evaluating people against other people. That focus on self-fulfillment rather than sacrificial commitment is a dangerous force for the survival of a marriage. One woman on this show actually said in an interview that she doesn't believe, quote, anyone should need to sacrifice anything for another person. Well, my advice to her would be, don't get married. That belief is toxic for relationships, especially a relationship which by God's design involves a lifelong commitment that requires sacrifice and compromise to withstand the stressful times and significant disagreements that sometimes come. Living together before marriage actually changes the attitudes about commitment and permanence. According to research that comes out of the Conference of Catholic Bishops, we find that when the lines are blurred between cohabitation and marriage, marriage begins to feel like a legal formality that is then easy to dispose of if you find somebody better. Well, the statistics are clear. Living together is a bad idea. So, well, we need to test things out. It doesn't help. It doesn't improve things. But here's the newest trend that is beginning to take place. It's called consensual non-monogamy. Now think about the language. It's the idea that married people are consenting with each other to not be sexually faithful to only each other. Often in the past, it's been referred to as polyamory. It's been called an open marriage. It's the idea that you can have adults who engage in sexual relationships outside of marriage, all with partners who supposedly consent to the arrangement. Polyamory, open marriage, swinging, or what's sometimes called monogamish relationships, they are consensual relationships that are not to be confused with sexual infidelity. That's what the American Psychiatric Association says. They have now defined this genre of consensual non-monogamy as not sexual cheating. They say it's not sexual cheating because everybody agrees to it. The problem is, whatever the American Psychiatric Association thinks, biblically speaking, sex outside of marriage is the very definition of infidelity, regardless of who consents to it. Some people consider this idea of non-monogamy as a new form of sexual orientation. In other words, that we're just bent in the direction of multiple sexual partners. And the whole movement is very closely related to the LGBTQ plus agenda. In fact, consensual non-monogamy as an actual sexual orientation is included in the plus sign at the end of LGBTQ plus. One person told Vogue magazine, "I think people are disillusioned with life right now and really starting to write their own rules." Really starting to write their own rules. There's the book of the Bible that talks about that. It's the book of Judges. Again and again, the cycle of moral and political decline plays out in the book of Judges. And the theme of every cycle of decline, as Israel becomes less and less faithful to the God that created them as a special people, the common theme is everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Folks, that's where we're at, right there. Everyone makes up their own rules because we're disillusioned with the way things are. Here's the reality. You shall not commit adultery is the seventh of the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses. The marriage of a man to a woman where both people forsake all others, that's the picture of Christ and His church. Not only that, the married love of one man and one woman is meant to produce children. And children are meant to be welcomed by God's grace into the arms of their mother and father, not into a confused and perverse arrangement that is nothing more than consent to recommend it. Sin has been consented to by humans, by adults, from the very beginning of time. But just because something is consensual can't make sin a good thing. Any expectation that marriage involves only two people, a man and a woman, and that those two people be faithful to one another is now determined to make you part of the oppressor class. If you hold to a traditional view of marriage, you are now a part of the patriarchy. You're a part of the problem in America. What we are witnessing is the loss of sexual sanity in our culture. But Christians understand one unshakable moral truth about human sexual behavior, and that is that God has given His consent to only one structure, not a couple made up of 3 partners, not consensual non-monogamy, not cohabitation. God has given His consent only to sex between a husband and a wife. If we go all the way back to the 2nd chapter of Genesis, it's very straightforward. And the Lord fashioned into a woman the rib which He had taken from the man, and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "At last this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. And for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother, and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." The one flesh relationship is the very way we are hardwired. And despite our impression that we are so much smarter than every generation that's ever gone before us, the fact of the matter is nothing brings fulfillment outside of the design that the designer himself put into place. We're not prudes. We're not afraid to talk about sex. We just understand that the models that our culture promotes don't produce the very thing that they say they yearn for: fulfillment, wholeness, love. Can we not find our way back to sanity? Can we not find our way to the design given to us by the designer? We need to throw all the rest of it out the window. This is Truth Currents.